welcome to the Bad Vibes Club. My name is Matthew Giraudot. I'm your host, as per. By the way, this is funded by the Arts Council. This is part of our year-long funding that we've got from Arts Council England. This podcast is a conversation between me and John Walter. And so often with these podcasts, I'm the least articulate person in the room, but particularly with John, he speaks so well about his practice, and listening back to it and doing the editing, it's just such an interesting conversation. We speak about so much. We speak about the jester figure. He talks about the origin of the word zaniness. He's got super interesting things to say about architecture. He teaches architecture, and he's got interesting things to say about the teaching of architecture and art and the importance of scale and different techniques. He talks about his Hayward touring show, Shonky, which is opening soon. He also talks about a long-term project called Capsid, which is a long-term research project about viruses, and he gets into some absolutely deep-level biology, which is really interesting to hear. And he makes it really easy to understand as well. We talk about the queer art of failure. We talk about bad painting. But the first thing we talk about is I read out a list of characters that John has invented through his practice. I want to start with very, very specific thing because I've immersed myself. You have a lot of work. And not only do you have a lot of work, but you have a lot of work very easily available to view.
Yes.
And I think that's interesting for like loads of reasons. Anyway, but it meant that what happened was I'm going to load up. I have like loads of notes, so forgive me for looking at my phone. But I'm going to read you a list of character names that have cropped up in your work. I found these: Barbara Travada, Chem Jester, Masonic Yoda, Johnny Bagelhead, Shitney Cuntstone, that's a very famous one, Mimsy, Pistachio, Shufty Cuntstone, Bonnie Raitt, Mario Balotelli, Grunter, hashtag, Miso Leroy, the Fabergé Hen, Fellatio Dyspepsia, Piggy Guggenheim, Lady Earth, Strawberry Shortcake, Yoda of Blowjobs, another Yoda.
Yeah, related.
Glory Hole Geisha, Zipper, Bummy Pete, Goat Guy, Leslie, who I want to note serves donuts from a cardboard toilet, and you even have a name for your, maybe this is your house now or where you used to live, but the Tandoori Cottage.
Yeah, that was Balfron. Yeah.
Ah, okay, yeah. So maybe we can start with that. Like, how did you start naming all these characters, and where do they come from?
Are we recording? That's amazing. Where do they come from? They sort of come as nicknames. It's like I need to distinguish them from each other, or like. So where's a good example? Some of them you listed were from Leicester when I did this thing called The News, and I had 6 characters. So I made 6 costumes, and they were based on some drawings I'd made. And really it's like you draw a blob or a thing, and you have to differentiate it from that thing. So you sort of give it a different colour or a different shape, but you maybe give it a different name. And then as you name them, they sort of take on things. But it's also a kind of things you overhear. So Mario Balotelli, somebody was chatting to me about football, which if you know me, I know nothing about. And then I was like, but that's a good name. And then they were really into him, and they were like talking about the poetry of it all. And I was like, well, that one can be called Mario Balotelli. So they sort of land, or like Bonnie Raitt. I was listening to a lot of Bonnie Raitt, and then I had this big bit of orange fabric, and she's ginger, so it made sense that she would be Bonnie Raitt. Shitney Cuntstone was like an in-joke with a friend of what could be the worst name you could have. And I was just winding her up, and then started calling her Shitney Cuntstone. And then later on I needed a character. I was like, but hang on, what if I actually was Shitney? And then Shitney's taken on this life of, and all of them take on a life of their own.
Yeah, sure. Shitney Cuntstone is the one that I definitely had seen multiple works by, and including. Are there any other characters that have kind of reappeared?
Well, Yoda of Blowjobs has appeared in different guises in different drawings and things. The Cuntstone family, Shufty being there's also Grandma Cuntstone. There's a lot of, but they're not written down. Maybe they're in the songs. Sure, yeah. So you get lots of other names crop up. Who's a recurring character? There were some characters that I used in America when I was doing a residency there that I brought into Alien Sex Club a bit. But often they just get invented for like a year or a project, and then they go again.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're like mascots or something.
Yeah, that's what I felt. I mean, I wanted to use them to then kind of go into talking about your costume work, because you use a lot of costumes and you use them in an interesting way. So it's quite a complex kind of set of stuff, isn't it? But I wanted to talk about the relationship between them and like dragging, because there's a quote on your website, and I'd kind of already noted down that it's like it's not gender-based drag, basically.
Yeah.
It's like the things aren't necessarily human, or they're not even. It's not about their gender, or it's not even really about their identity. It's like it's costume for kind of costume's sake or something.
Yeah.
And there's a good quote about gestured drag.
Yeah, it's a form of drag that's gestured as opposed to gendered.
Yeah.
And that's only something I worked out recently, in that, I mean, drag isn't something that particularly interests me. This whole craze for RuPaul. I mean, I watch it.
Sure.
But the gender aspect of it is not interesting to me, because I don't need that personally, whereas I do need to disguise myself as funny, because I'm actually really serious and quite boring. So I have to make up these personas socially, and they sort of grew out of costumes that didn't have names, I suppose. I mean, I always dressed up. There was a dressing up box at home, famously, and my mum almost got rid of me at 4 years old because I was wearing a green tulle hat in the shopping centre, and she was so embarrassed. She tried to lose me, but she didn't. And then when I was doing my undergrad at Oxford, I started wearing costumes to parties. So I dressed up as a red Teletubby, and I also dressed up in this kind of Mike Kelly flasher coat that when you opened it up, it had animals in it. And these were really excuses to take the emphasis off me and put the emphasis on the costume.
Yeah, sure.
So immediately people treat you differently because you've clowned. But it's not really clowning, it's... well, the way I've rationalised it best at the moment is that it's gesturing, in the sense of... Sian Nagai writes about the zany and the zany, and this kind of buffoon clown who's an itinerant worker, who's an artist, essentially. And so it's really sending up who I am, who you are, who we all are in this game of looking at things and talking about them, I suppose. And then you can have the conversation, because if you look like the fool, everybody can ask you, well, particularly people that aren't artists, if they come to a show and you're dressed like a fool, they can ask you very blunt questions because you've empowered them, because you look like the div. And then that's quite nice, because they will feel comfortable. You've put them at ease, essentially, in how ridiculous you look. So there's already... the ice has been broken, I suppose.
I guess there's a few sides to your work. There's kind of quite a light, frivolous side, and then there's... I think this seems like a more recent turn since your PhD and Alien Sex Club, and then more recently Capsid.
Yeah.
You've been approaching pretty directly like big topics, so like AIDS and HIV, and the rise in HIV in young gay men in Britain. Is that particularly it?
Yeah, that was the sort of background to Alien Sex Club, theoretically.
So was it a conscious decision to use this technique of kind of gesturing, or to approach a very serious topic?
Sort of circuitously.
Okay.
So Alien Sex Club came about really through a process of having a hunch that I wanted to do something about a sex club, and it was called King's Cross £4 Sex Club, but it never really became. It didn't find a home. You know, sometimes you have a hunch, you want to do something, and you're trying to work out where it might live. And then this title, Alien Sex Club, came. Then I was like, well, what's that? And then there was an opportunity to explore it as a PhD, practice-based. And then I suppose that's how things locked into place. It was, I think all of those things were floating around separately, and then maybe they've joined. And yeah, the frivolous side is there, and I suppose the subject matter's not always been clear until the past few years. You know, I've not been able to say very clearly what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Formally, maybe, but not in terms of discourse. And now it's very clear that there's these zones that I can use this way of working to look at, and that's a bit of a shift. So it's not just the frivolity of the costumes, it's also a kind of
humour generally, where you've got cartooning, there's a playfulness in the way things are handled that is in counterpoint to the tone of the subject.
Yeah.
And those two things can charge each other, and then you can say something different than what's been said, I suppose.
Because I think if I had been asked before I looked back at the work online, if I'd been asked what was in your giant installation of Alien Sex Club at Ambika P3, was that in 2015?
Yeah.
Right. I would have talked about the maze-like structure. You kind of recreated the kind of, I don't know, you created a kind of version of a sex club, like this kind of darkened corridors and things. I'd have talked about the drawings. I always love your kind of drawings. I would have talked about videos. I would have talked about tarot. So it was someone doing tarot and then the chem jester who was serving drinks. I would not have remembered the mobile HIV testing laboratory. But I wouldn't have remembered this very, what seems to me now to be like a very big feature, kind of hiding in plain sight.
Yeah. Hiding in plain sight is a good way of putting it. What's the other phrase I've used before? A smokescreen comprised of the truth. I think that's how Cedric Price puts it.
Yeah.
Well, the research was really into how you can represent HIV now and how it differs from the 80s, and how post-minimal representations have dominated the discourse. So coming out of Felix Gonzalez Torres and going right through to Prem Sahib, and how that way of representing things is over-familiar and thus needs reanimating in order to reanimate the discussion. And using a maximalist aesthetic and spatial design as a way of intervening in that trend. And what is maximalism? That's ill-defined. Robert Pincus Witten talks about it in the 80s, but he really brings in people like Schnabel and sort of trans avant-garde painters who are using figuration and kind of old-fashioned handling of paint. So it's really quite ill-defined. Then Dougie Fields talks about it as minimalism with a plus, plus, plus. So it's also ripe for the taking. And so the idea was really to represent HIV as a very complex web of things where you couldn't look at things in isolation. The change in access to drugs and the pill burden associated with that.
What's pill burden?
So pill burden in the early 90s, when treatment was just beginning to work, you could be on something like 40 pills a day, and now you could be on one. So that changes how visible the virus is if you're treated for it. It's privatized it essentially, because you can hide being on treatment. And this has a lot of social implications. I mean, Alien Sex Club was really looking at the social factors around HIV, and that was triggered by my own proximity to people living with HIV and my own fear of it as a gay man, as a human, but also kind of just trying to grapple with. I mean, it's shifted even since then.
Really?
Cases of HIV have gone down. Like new diagnoses have gone down for the first time in several years last year. So there's been a shift, and I think
that was really recent. I read that the other day.
Yeah.
And why is that? Is there a reason?
I think there's been a lot of people pushing for it. My project was one of those things, but there's been a whole kind of grassroots looking, particularly at chemsex, so people using recreational drugs, particularly crystal meth, around sex and risk associated with that, and people trying to intervene in that. And that's clearly working, which is great. Also access to PrEP, so the idea that you take a antiretroviral pill if you're negative, and that if the virus enters your system, there's already something to attack it.
Oh, wow, okay.
So that's really going to replace condom use over time.
Wow.
And that's not available yet on the NHS, but a lot of people are on trials or are getting it through other means.
Yeah.
And that's changing the dynamic. So, I mean, just in talking, I'm telling you a million things, and the challenge was, how do you talk about all this at once? And the way I resolved that, or the way I researched that, was to use a maze as an emblem that could contain this multiplicity of things. And there's this idea of a cruise maze in sex culture, which isn't a real thing. It's a metaphor for a club. I mean, it can be a real thing, but it's never as exciting as a real maze. I mean, I'd love it if Hampton Court Maze... Yeah, exactly. The best cruise maze in London, Hampton Court Maze. But it probably was in its day.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And it worked much better in Liverpool when it was really dark because it was in Camp and Furnace.
Oh yeah, in that big room that you.
Yeah, and it was really dank and like club-like. I suppose it found me and I found it. I suppose it's partly financially driven. I was like, I need to sort my finances out concurrently with this need to find this place for this project. And this practice-based PhD thing presented itself to me. And I'd always poo-pooed PhDs. I was like, this is not something artists should do.
Why did you think that? I think that's really interesting.
When I was at the Slade doing my MA, all the PhD students were tossers. I mean, they were really just hanging about having a smoke, doing nothing. And the work was not interesting.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was not a thing to do. And I'd also met a few people that had really struggled with it and it had done their practice no good. But I did mine within architecture, and that enabled me enough of a sidestep to not be navel-gazing at my practice all the time, but to be using my practice to make a test for another thing. And I think that was my way of solving the problem. In the end, there is a chapter that narrates how the work is made, but it doesn't destroy my approach to making things, which was a good thing.
What is your link to architecture? Firstly, how did you how did you do your PhD through the architecture department? And secondly, do you do teaching at the AA sometimes?
Yeah. I'm really. I'm sure there's a phrase for people like me. It's an extension of all these doing all these different activities, which is like you know, I'm a jack of all trades. It's like, what can I unlearn, or how can I get out of my comfort zone? But also, I happened to hang out with a lot of architects, partly through Bruce McLean, and his son's an architect, Will. Then I met his wife, Sam, and Victoria Watson, who ended up being one of my supervisors. So I just kind of entered that world naturally, and I think it suited my way of thinking about things holistically, and that maybe art could be functional, because I don't really believe in objects for their own sake. It's like, what can they do in terms of conversation or changing, all those sort of things. And I would often get invited in to be a guest critic at the AA or things like this. So over time, it's not that I've converted to that. I'm definitely not an architect.
Okay.
But I've the spatial design elements of the project, looking at cruising, the spaces of cruising, how that's formalised into architectural scenarios, was why the research could be based in architecture, and also what I could bring from architectural discourse into art, and what I could bring from art into architectural discourse. So it's about swapping information partly. And then now I co-teach with Sam Hardingham a diploma unit at the AA, which I was talking with somebody about this the other day. I think that what I bring as somebody who's not native to the discipline is having to make really having to stretch to make analogies, but that being a useful, it's all critical thinking. It's all the same questions ultimately. So Sam can bring, very specific architectural things, and I can bring, well, what the fuck, or why haven't you thought about it this way? Or, and also I'm learning, so it feels very live. It's not boring for me. Sometimes it's boring to go into art school.
Yeah, well, it's really hard, isn't it? Because you either really like the work and wish that you thought of it, or you don't like it. Whereas architecture, I guess it's always separate from your practice completely.
Yeah, I'm on my toes. And there's a different conversation about scale that you have in architecture that you don't have in art school.
Okay.
Because you can be thinking on multiple scales simultaneously. You can be thinking on a city scale. You can be thinking on the scale of a site, of a model, of an intervention, of a costume. And at art school, I feel like I'm too aware of the types, and I immediately see people falling into ways of working and the institution not questioning it. I was at an art school recently, and there was just a kind of bad energy. Like there was something like it just wasn't vital enough in this particular department. I just felt like just all need to shake this up. It was just a bit bleak.
Do you think that architecture, this ability to think in multiple scales, is that inherent in the subject, or is that because of the way that you feel like art might be being taught at the moment?
It's
or?
part of the discipline in architecture. Is the scale is one of your key variables, and the idea of looking at something as a plan and a section, and in this way of these are kind of native drawing methods that aren't in art. They're design things, and it's not to say that the architects are further ahead than the artists. It's just that when you swap disciplines, you can co-opt things much easier than if you are native to something. And Warhol is a great example of that, coming from store design, window dressing into art. You're sort of liberated to be blunter or ruder or mess around with the conventions a bit easier. And I feel like, particularly in painting departments, and I come from painting, that there's just too little consideration of where the work might go in the world or what it might be for. Architects are at least thinking about the function of something, and art can be functional.
The scale thing obviously applies very directly to your work, because you do tiny kind of painted drawings, and then you have made lots of artist books which range in scale from very small to very, very large. And then obviously you do things that are more like sculpture and things that are more like installation and things that have elements of performance.
Yeah.
When did that stuff start kind of getting into your painting practice?
So I, as an undergrad, I started thinking about multiple language painting, which, at the time it was people like Inka Essenhai that were very big, and really thinking about...
What were they doing? Sorry,
so this is like late 90s, early 2000s. So she was making these very calligraphic, sort of slightly Japanesey versions. There was a lot of painting that Saatchi was showing when it was at Boundary Road. 90s David Sally or Carol Dunham, but there was a lot of conversations about multiple speed painting, or Fiona Ray as well, and this way of thinking about a painting as a counterpoint, in the sense that Bakhtin would talk about counterpoint or polyvocality. It inevitably meant that I wanted to add in more and more different voices and expand the range. So it was like, if you put that shape or colour or move, what's the opposite of that? And then that inevitably meant that it came out of the frame, out of the painting, into the world. And also, a big part of my approach to making is, how can I trick myself out of what I know?
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is as soon as I become slick at something, is to go and do the thing I'm really amateur at. So that might be learning GarageBand, or learning a new package on the computer, or using Metal most recently. And then I'm disabled again, and the thing can be a bit wonky or shonky and a bit awkward and has a different directness.
Yeah.
So you just have to, I just keep trying to find a new thing that I'm not familiar with. And then architecture's an extension of that.
Yeah.
And in the translation between those things, there's a bridge that can be made, or a join, or a transformation, or a slippage that's quite exciting. So I'm making these paintings at the moment that come from some prints and are going to go towards some prints, and I can see the leaps and I can measure the moves a bit more. So those are formal things, but they also just sort of allow conceptual leaps as well.
You mentioned maximalism, which is what I was hinting at with the amount of work that you have available online. It's not just that there's a lot of work, but you obviously have had a long enough career to have made a lot of work anyway. But the way it's presented on your website is this kind of flat single screen. The only hierarchical things are, some things are bigger, so like your more recent work is bigger.
Yeah, some projects are bigger.
But it's a very neatly curated archive. It's not messy, right? So like your and obviously your installations are like this. You can have like different kind of clashing, what's the word? Designs of wallpaper behind painting, which is then has sculpture in the middle, and then you're in a costume in between. But at no point is there any kind of like messiness. And I think is that key to the way you use this idea of maximalism. That
I'm not messy. I suppose the maximalism thing is an ongoing investigation. Some people talk about this, but really they're talking about capitalism. They're talking, you go and see some brightly coloured things and it looks like shop design. That's not maximalism to my mind. Maximalism is something about not privileging a thing by putting space around it. So, for example, I just did a crit recently with some students that had made work in a week and had to curate it together, 30 students, and they'd all just put a gap between everything, so nothing was in conversation, whereas maximalism suggests that you might acknowledge that the space you're in isn't a white cube, that there are plug sockets, but there also might be a hat stand, or there might be a road. I mean, the analogy I use is how does the work stand out if you put it in the middle of a crossroads in Japan rather than in white cube? Then it's a challenge. It's too easy to put a thing in a room and it have value or be interesting. If it's the only thing you're looking at, of course we're all going to talk about it. But for the thing to have to adapt to be with the keyboard that's here and the light and the Hessian that's on the wall, that they're interesting constraints. And I suppose in doing all these displacement activities, as I call them, that I'm talking about earlier, they're sort of helping contextualise everything. So it's also about maximalism. I think is also partly about taking responsibility for where your thing lives in the world by saying, rather than slot into a system that's already presented or wait for somebody to come along and ordain you, you'll just make the world for the thing. So you'll make the architecture for it, and you'll make the song, and you'll write the criticism, and that's in the end that's paid off. But it's been a bit of a slog. But yeah,
the later work I've seen is almost more installation, and you've kind of done everything, or worked with collaborators obviously, but done everything in the show. But how did you? Obviously, you have to get to a certain level to be able to do that. How did it?
When I left the Slade, nobody wanted what I was making.
Yeah.
Hiraki Sawa got signed up by James Cohan Gallery, and then I was making these ugly paintings with lumps on them and bits of trash and tat and books and Pee Wee Herman printouts, and nobody was asking me to be in their group show. Understandably so. But I mean, it was partly that I hadn't resolved how it should be shown, but it was also that it was incredibly bombastic and it didn't play well with others.
Yeah.
And so over time that's been a good thing to have, but it's a slower process of negotiating your thing into the world.
Yeah. I was working in my studio the other day, and it hit me that I have like a perfectly incoherent style. Like there's at no point do I make it easier for other. I'm making work at the moment which is almost impossible to photograph. It's made out of brightly coloured dots, and to take a photo of this to kind of vibrate and bleed into each other.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I've just made it really. And I thought I was making work that I could put in a gallery at this point, but no. And I think you have. I mean, obviously in a very different way. You have a similar thing where you kind of make it hard for yourself. Like even the fact that I could look at all your work. I got to Shitney Cuntstone's page, and I can't remember how many songs there are, but there's like...
Did you get dragged in to Bog to Walk or something?
I had to just stop with Shitney Cuntstone because you've got to have a full kind of life. But
I think that I do work prolifically, and I make it's all experiments. It's all like, and in order to make an experiment, you have to have constants and variables, and then you just breed things off against each other and you make things. Then you get some are good and some are bad. I mean, I'm sort of putting a mixture of good and bad on there, and you can sift through it and decide. I mean, I've edited it a bit, it's got my preferences, but the inconsistency is a reality of being an artist or being a human. And what we see when we go to very curated shows is a complete tidying up and bias of something, but also the artist can have bias over their own work and do it. So I think it's also about taking ownership of your own career. Yeah, that's partly what it's about, which I'd prefer.
Can we talk about Capsid for a bit?
It's quite a long-term project. It's really about 3 years in length, and we're about 6 to 8 months in.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, so it culminates in 2018. So it's a period of research where I get to hang out with them and learn what they're doing, and then make a lot of stuff. And it's a longer lead up time than Alien Sex Club, and it's a bigger grant, so it enables a lot more to happen. Okay, what's a capsid? So this is stuff that came out through Alien Sex Club.
Yeah.
What what we know of viruses from the media are very superficial renderings of them. They're the exteriors. And on a nano level, inside a virus, there's usually another protein shell called a capsid. And the capsid is a container for virus. I won't even say the virus, because I've started to think of virus as a messenger. It's not really a thing. It's a way of transmitting an idea. That's all it really is. It doesn't exist. It's not alive. It's just replicating itself frantically. But in the case of HIV, it has a very interesting capsid that's very strangely shaped, which has an odd geometry, but also the received wisdom about it is completely wrong. So at the moment, all the drugs work on the assumption that when the capsid gets pushed into the cytoplasm of the cell that it's infecting, that will immediately fall apart, and somehow the virus particles, the two strands of RNA and some enzymes, will get to the nucleus of the cell and transcribe new virus. However, Greg, who I'm working with, Greg Towers in his lab at UCL, they've shown that this couldn't happen because the cytoplasm is a really hostile place for the virus to live, and it will attack the capsid, and that's what it's designed to do. So it's a bit more like a sperm and an egg scenario, where loads of virus will attach to a host cell, and lots of capsids will get in, lots will die, like a minefield. But the successful capsid will co-opt certain particles in the cytoplasm to hide it, so it cloaks itself, and it also helps get navigated to the nucleus and introduced to the nucleus to trick entry, and then it squirts the DNA that it's been making en route into the nucleus to rewrite and reprogram the cell.
So it's not this kind of like battle activity that is kind of the narrative, the metaphor is very much a battle, but this is almost more like subterfuge or some kind of...
It's totally subterfuge, and it's totally a negotiation between the two things. Greg would say that they've evolved together, so they're in conversation with each other. And a good analogy is, in a movie, if we land on a new planet and a virus attacks everyone, this couldn't happen because the virus has got to have evolved alongside the human.
Yeah.
They're negotiating each other.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is this narrative around the cloaking and the hiding, and the way that it has to interact with the host to get done what it needs to get done, and also that there's a potential to intervene in the capsid. So that whole structure is made up of hexagonal and pentagonal proteins that are opening and closing, a bit like a portal. And they've got a tiny hole in the middle that's sucking stuff in from the cytoplasm to fuel it to move.
Oh, okay.
So if you could get drugs small enough to get inside the capsid, you could explode it before it got to the nucleus. So there's a whole set of implications that aren't really what Greg's doing, but down the chain of command of what this could lead to. But I'm interested in it because I'm interested in it for its own sake, and also how you might think about how culture is transmitted. So what is the subterfuge in how we all acquire our identities, and how might you rethink identity politics using these narratives? And also it gets me off the exclusively gay topic of HIV, which was a good thing to put down. And that was, that just happened to be where it went with Alien Sex Club. Now it's moving on, and I'm able to look at other viruses because other viruses have other kinds of capsids. So this information is useful. So it gives me lots of visual stuff, but it gives me lots of narratives.
Yeah.
And also within each of those things, there's a million other bits of research going on. So this has the potential to grow elsewhere.
Two things strike me as one, I think I can't remember where I read it, but there's so much that I've read, but like the etymological link between hospitality and hostility. This idea that hospitality kind of includes the fact that the thing you're being hospitable towards can't be like your family or your, you have to be hospitable to a stranger, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
And then that strikes me as like a kind of obvious analogy between like the gallery and the and the visitor. Like you're not a visitor if you're like the friend of the artist. So like you being when you're hosting your own work, you're a very generous host. You allow people to pass through you without, you're not performing. You're not like drawing attention towards yourself, even
It's
though you
not
might be
acting.
dressed. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you maybe provide a drink, and you provide a like entry point into the show, which is almost always the objects and the installation itself.
Yeah, I mean the hospitality hostility analogy within Capsid is really important for me, and that's something that the scientists are so amused by. But because they just don't think like this, and those are the kind of ideas we're able to exchange, because it's very much on that conceptual level of creative thinking that we can meet. So it's interesting that you've picked up on that as well. So that must be an artist's way of approaching this.
Well, I think that's crazy, because surely you started with the very good point that like the narrative that is described in terms of viruses and infection is not only like a bad metaphor, but is just actually wrong and can be replaced with a new narrative that is way more meaningful. And that surely would be a central feature of
this is a cultural
research,
studies way
right?
of thinking. I mean, they could do a whole research project where they just swap the metaphors they're using and redo all the tests and see what comes up. But this is not the way they think. But they might after a year. I mean, certainly we're affecting each other. So, you could get Greg in and have a different conversation and see what my presence has done in reverse. But to go back to the hospitality thing, I mean, it's performance in the sense of this is a performance, or any going out into the world as a performance. It's just slightly heightened because I'm in a costume and there's a stage, which is a bar. But I hate acting and I hate going to the theatre, and I don't want to put anybody in that position because it makes me feel uncomfortable. So it's more how can I be a receptacle or a bridge between you and the work, particularly if you're not a regular. So, yes, the idea of the stranger is important, but also the idea of the non-expert is important. So we as artists we're all equipped to go and engage or disengage as we wish, but my mum or my godmother or some complete stranger off the street who doesn't regularly go into a gallery, I feel like I want to empower them to have a response. I mean, they might just have a hunch that something is good or bad, and that might be interesting to talk about, or at least they shouldn't leave without asking the question. That's more important. I don't want people to feel stupid, because it's actually not that complicated, and it's more important to empower them to know that this is just stuff.
Do you think that's why there's obviously loads of reasons why you would carry on painting, but do you think that's why you've kept doing kind of figurative things and painting and stuff? Because I think for a lot of lay people, I know my mum would much prefer if my things were on a wall, and so not that she would like them more, but so she would have a question that she knew would make sense. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely makes sense. I think about this a lot. In that, is it a more pragmatic approach to use forms that are identifiable as art? Is that actually a useful thing for? Because but people don't know what a painting is.
Sure.
They think they know what a painting. They don't. But maybe you need to just tell them it's a painting in order to get the conversation going, or something like this. It's funny because I've been making a lot of paintings recently, and I'm excited by them, but I've been posting them and people have been wetting themselves about them. I'm like, but hang on, like, what is it? Because I've not been making a paint, or is it just because it's a painting? Like, you think you understand it? Is that the hook? Went to a party and some friends of my boyfriend's were really into the new work, and I'm thinking, why? Like, why is it this work? It's not. I don't think it's. I mean, maybe it is wildly better, but it's unlikely. It's forms. People, people want to know, this is a piece of music, this is a play, this is a painting.
I have this horrible sensation as well that at the moment a lot of it's not cynical on anyone's part, I don't think, by the artist or the person who's excited about. But I think people are excited when someone who does work that is not on a wall and not a painting or not identifiable as something, some kind of obvious form, then does that thing, because it's like, oh, but they're also like a contemporary artist. They're not some like reactionary painter who's just sitting like really annoyed that all these video artists are doing really well. So it's like okay to like it or something. But then that kind of, it does speak to like a weird reactionary element.
It's also so the way I've been rationalising it through Shonky, for example, is thinking about authorship, and people like to know that something is authored. So there's this idea of the mark. This prevails. We might have all moved well beyond that, but but other people will go into the gallery and want to know, did you make it? Now, we know that doesn't matter, but it does matter on some kind of... So it's a sort of Brexit thing where, like, we need to bring people
Like
up to
sovereignty
speed.
or something.
Yeah, it's like we need... I think that there's like an art world conversation that's gone over there, and then there's like a populist conversation that's
Yeah.
over there. And I don't think it matters that it's more about trying to bring them onto the same terrain
Yeah.
to meet. That's why I don't... you can use the painting to then get to the other conversations.
Sure.
Also, you know, the painting is odd because it's having the other conversations all the time. So, you know, the paintings are mutating because I'm cutting the metal or making the song. Those things are directly changing the painting.
Yeah.
But I don't think we should disenfranchise people by not sometimes working in modes that they think they understand.
Yeah. The idea that there is a form that is kind of revolutionary or radical is wildly out of
No.
date. Anyway, so there's
Yeah.
no reason why painting can't be having those same conversations that sculpture and whatever.
This goes back to the architecture conversation. I think it's like when's it appropriate to use a form is a better way of thinking about it. So it's like we'll often talk about a project that a student's doing and be like, well, you probably need a cross section. That would be the best way of looking at showing this idea. And it's more like, oh, so in this scenario, this needs a song, or in this scenario, this needs a performance. I feel that's more where it's moving in my mind. In order to explore this aspect of it, I need to make a series of paintings on this size, and then you shift the game again, and then you get some new information about what it is you're looking at. Yeah.
Let's talk about Shonky. So this podcast, it can probably
It's
go
all out
out.
in there. It's all out in the world
No,
now.
but it can probably go out. I'm only going to start releasing them from like June.
Oh, perfect. Brilliant.
So I can launch it kind of whenever you want from
Amazing.
July or when is it? When's the first one?
October. Get it out in July or August or something.
Yeah, great,
Get it out,
okay.
yeah.
So yeah, you can talk about it as much as you want.
Brilliant.
But so you won the Hayward Curatorial
Yeah,
Open, which is
I know,
incredible.
It's mad.
Like, congratulations.
Thank you.
It's brilliant.
That grew out of the PhD as well, actually,
Oh,
because I
really?
was
Okay.
in trying to theorise what I was doing. Like technically, I really had to differentiate what I was doing from badness. Because really, I can say that to you.
Yeah, the bad vibes. It's a safe space for badness.
But I've always been interested in bad painting, but I'm not. It's not just to do with draftsmanship. I'm also
Yeah.
employing craft badness, which is
Yeah.
another layer of badness.
That's interesting. So bad painting, because it's an art. Bad painting has been heavily kind of theorised. Is that a good Julian
Marsha
Noble
Tucker did this
thing?
show in '78
Okay.
called Bad Painting,
Oh, right, wow.
and it really established it. It was all about It wasn't good draftsmanship. It wasn't classical draftsmanship, and it was also related to outsider art in certain ways of composing things. So it's got a particular slant on imagery, whereas Shonky, as I've theorised it, also brings into play queer theory, Jack Halberstam's ideas about the queer art of failure, and the idea that there might be something radical within the thing that is done amateurishly or approximately, or with the glitch, or because there's digital equivalents of this where the mistake, or it's partly to do with the order in which you edit something, or because I'll often make the statement quite quickly, and then it's a case of, do I intervene in what I've done or do I preserve it? And often the thing you author first of all has the most emotion, or it has a set of qualities that if you finesse it all gets lost. So Shonkyness is also something about keeping all of that live badness and risk in play.
And then there's the subtitle of the show, Shonky, and then the subtitle is The Aesthetics of Awkward.
Yeah.
And awkward is the Bad Vibes Club loves a bit of awkward.
Yeah.
Why the word Shonky as opposed to just the awkward kind of?
So I've used this word shonky for years, and some people know it and some people don't. I think it's
of it
actually
as like
Scottish.
a Leeds thing. Oh, is it?
Oh, it's
okay.
maybe a northern thing.
Yeah.
Then I probably have. My mum's from Scotland, and I probably got it from her. It's less of a southern thing, I think. And really, you'd be like, oh, that's a bit shonky, and it just kind of does what it needs to, or it makes do, or it's a bit off.
Yeah.
But it's not a derogatory thing necessarily. It's not about shoddy. It's not as bad. That's much more negative.
Yeah.
Shonky's also, there's something charming about the shonkiness or something, and it. So I've used this very casually, and I thought this is about time I give this a place and try and work out what the hell it is I'm getting at. And I think that the way I'm trying to explore it in the show is through other artists' works. There's 15 artists that I'm curating into this show, and they're all using awkwardness in different ways. So Arakawa and Gins, who are this architectural duo that are both dead, one was American and one was Japanese, they made architectures that would trick you out of your habits. So they were really obstacle courses in that they would hate that, but they had theorized this very heavily about how you could stimulate the immune system to extend life by making architectures that were awkward. So they built this house called the Bioscleve House that's like an inverted terrain where you have to climb down to the kitchen and climb to the bathroom, and everything's in the wrong place, and all of the habits that you form in a space are dislodged, and you're thinking. And so that's one way of looking at shonkiness. That's a very formalised way. Someone like Louise Fishman, who's an American painter that's not so well known here, but she's really playing with abstract expressionism and taking it in a very lesbian, queer, female direction, feminist direction, and often making marks that you just go, what the they're on the edge. It's not even, it's about bad taste, it's also about, is this acceptable? Is this going to dry? Like, there's all kinds of questions about it.
Practical implications of it,
and she's in her, gosh, I don't know how old she's now, in her 70s maybe, and it's quite, it's not a look that has resolved in time. They still look a bit ugly.
Yeah.
And that's part of what's so exciting about them, is that they're jarring and they refresh your eyes. So Shonky is about, when I saw you that day at Open School East and we talked about queer, I mean, I have an intuition that queer theory is a load of bunk. So, I'm coming towards it rather than from it, if you see what I mean. Like, it's something that I'm having to engage with over time.
So I wonder, so in the press release, you don't use the word queer, but you do use the word Ben.
Oh, really? Yeah, that cropped up.
Which I thought was interesting because it's, queerness is, in the art world at least, or in the kind of theory world, is very much recuperated. It's like just a positive thing to.
It's de rigueur.
Yeah,
you have to say it.
Yeah,
that's why I'm so suspicious of it. It's not that it's not real or true, and it's a discipline. I think that, I mean, this came up in the PhD because I didn't. The queer text that I used came in quite late, so there was something that I found on the journey. I'm not theorising from a position of queer theory. It's something that I'm finding a join with. I mean, I just happen to make things awkwardly. I'm awkward. I feel awkward in the world. I wonder why people are looking at me, and it's not that I've got shit up my leg, but I've sort of dressed a bit like I put the wrong things together. I can't quite get it to.
But do you think that's I mean, I think you dress incredibly well. But I'm sure a lot of people would agree with me.
There's one bad vibe to another. Yeah.
But I always think, you were talking about like the costumes that you make, and they're a strange mixture of hiding and displaying. You're like, you're peacocking around because you're bigger than everyone else and you've got more colours than everyone else. But at the same time, like, it stops people being able to approach you in a normal kind of way, I guess.
Yeah, smokescreen comprised of the truth. Absolutely. I mean, that's the position I want socially, or that I've needed socially, I suppose. And I don't know what that's about. I don't think I'll ever get to the bottom of that. I like to have my privacy is part of it. And also I find the celebrity artist I'm a bit suspicious of that. But I mean, I think this awkwardness thing is a way of moving things ahead in all disciplines, and that's what Shonky's telling us a story about something that's always been known in a way, but it's looking at it with queer theory as its cousin, and it's looking at formal things. It's also looking at other strategies. You've got someone like Jacoby Satterwhite who's making those incredibly sort of lavish animations, but they're sort of they're crunchy, or there's bits missing, or that that doesn't all quite result. It's not slick. The shonky is the antithesis of the slick, and it's against fabrication culture. It's about putting the hand of the author, or at least the rhetoric of the author, back in the frame. So it goes back to the conversation we were having. It says, okay, we know that the author might be dead, or that might not be important, but if you, as an audience member, think that's important, we'll give it to you. And Benedict Drew will draw on a Wacom tablet, and there'll be the evidence of the hand in there. So it's just a device, I think, for animating a conversation. And people like handmade things. They want a bit of pottery. Or, I don't think that's going to go away in a way.
Yeah.
So I think I don't think that it's a fashion move, although I think that there will be, and I think we are seeing a reaction against fabrication culture. Although now we're getting fabrication that makes it look shonky.
What do you mean?
I think that there's more and more fabrication going on.
Yeah,
there's such an economy around that. Although God knows how it gets funded or who's buying these things, but that's a separate thing. I deliberately didn't put any ceramics in the show because I feel like that's very exposed and very well documented at the moment.
Like the current trend for ceramics,
Yeah, and I don't have anything against it. I just
not.
think that it's almost a genre in its own right.
It is, and it's kind of every piece of ceramics that's shown in the gallery currently is shonky. It's not like there had been like an unshonky ceramics that was popular before.
No, it's like we need the slick ceramics show.
Yeah, I can't wait for that to come.
That's the follow-up. Yeah.
I wonder whether that craving for the mark of the hand or something is so obvious in ceramics, and that's why it's been the first thing to break with the previous trend for slickness and fabrication. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, for me, it was things like in Alien Sex Club when I would wallpaper a piece of honeycomb board and it would buckle, and it was like, well, do you go with this or do you start again? It's like, well, you go with it. The materials dictate the response, and I'm more interested in the mistakes opening up another inquiry. It's like you've got to. I like that play where it's a dialogue with the materials. So, for example, with these big fiberglass sculptures that I've just made in Edinburgh, the first layer of resin and fiberglass we put on, and it rained that night. And so it's on top of cardboard, so the cardboard sucked up all the water, and it was -1 degree, so nothing cured. And I was having conniptions going, what the fuck? And then, of course, as soon as the atmosphere changed, everything cured very fast. But the objects had mutated under the conditions of the dampness. And it was, somebody else would have gone, oh, I've got to cut that out and start again. And I was like, oh, well, actually, this is workable. This is more interesting. They've kind of settled into a different shape that they feel comfortable in, and found. So it's I sort of work with the constraints of the accidents.
Yeah.
Which we Francis Bacon, that we all know that is a thing, but I think it's about empathy, and people can get a whiff of that off an object when they see it. They can tell whether it was loved when it was made. So that's partly what Shonky's about as well, is how those things signify between author and viewer other less easily described qualities, which in fiction or writing we can talk about a lot more clearly, I think.
What do you mean?
Well, we talk about the reader and the writer, and we can talk about. It's sort of. I think there's more of a vocabulary for the space that's created there, or the way the book becomes this intermediary zone, because there's no. I mean, the object is not the object. The object is the way of animating the imagination. Whereas with an object, there's a belief that it somehow has value as an object.
Yeah.
Which it doesn't. It's a book. It's only a thing to ignite the imagination as well. And that's what's forgotten, I think, in making art sometimes.
Yeah. So this idea that the author or the artist has this very direct connection with the object, and that connection is somehow rehearsed or reperformed with the viewer through their viewing of it or something.
Yeah, or the value of the object is only its presence as an intermediary.
Okay.
It has no other. It can have market value, but it doesn't. That's not its. that's only because we made one of them.
Yeah.
And that's what people need to remember, I think, is that it's only there to enable that conversation or that experience or that emotion to happen.
So this is that idea of function that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, because like, Alien Sex Club had a function in the sense of it was putting something on the agenda. You know, it was saying, oh, look, if I do this thing, it's as opposed to doing another thing, or it's doing a thing differently to somebody. I mean, they're small moves, but they're significant enough moves that they're political. Not in any grand way, but it's just like, let's put this at the centre of the conversation. And that's about all you can do as an artist, I think. It's quite minor. But, I mean, I think that is functional.
Yeah.
And I think that the things I want to go and see are functional in that they're trying to change my mind or trying to open me up to new possibilities, or that's a function. But that's just maybe not spoken about in that way usually.
Yeah.
It's not functional as in you can drink out of it.
Yeah, sure.
This is my
Should
new
put
show.
some ceramics in, yeah.
You can drink, yeah.
Come
I can't even drink out of that.
Thanks to John for that conversation. Thanks to you for listening. I will be with you very soon. Goodbye.